Join, and it's recording.
Hi, thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Give everybody a chance to log on. Thanks for joining. If you're just logging on, we're just going to wait a few minutes and then we'll get started.
Thanks for joining us. I think we're going to give it another minute or two to let everybody join in. Okay, shall we go ahead and get started? All right, well, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Share the Water webinar. This is part of our boater education program for making sure that people are keeping our whales out there safe in Puget Sound. This is the fourth one that we've done, and if you missed the other three, they are available on Orca Network's YouTube channel. If you do a search for Orca Network Share the Water, you'll find the other webinars popping up there. My name is Stephanie Raymond. I'm the program manager for Orca Network, and I'm going to be one of the presenters this evening. And Elisa and Cindy, if you'd like to go ahead and introduce yourselves, please.
Hi, all. I'm Elisa Lemire Brooks, and I am the Whale Sighting Network Coordinator for Orca Network.
And I'm Cindy Hansen. I'm the Education and Advocacy Coordinator for Orca Network. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we can get started then. So slow down for the sounders. The sounders are the gray whales that come into the Salish Sea every spring, and we're going to learn a little bit about them. Then we're going to talk about some of the rules and regulations that boaters should be following when they're out there on the water with the whales. Then we're going to turn it over to Elisa to talk about the sounders themselves, what we know about who's here right now and how they're doing. And finally, Cindy just came back from San Ignacio Lagoon in Baja California, which is the breeding grounds for the gray whales, and she's going to give us an update from there. So if at any time you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box and we will answer them as we get to them. So this program is done in partnership with NOAA and Orca Network. We're dedicated to raising awareness of the whales of the Pacific Northwest and the importance of providing them with safe and healthy habitats. And we do this in a number of ways. We have the Whale Sighting Network that Elisa coordinates, where we're gathering information from volunteers all over the Salish Sea about the sightings that they have of whales and, in some cases, pinnipeds. The Share the Water Boating Education and Awareness Program. The Free Lolita Tokite campaign, which has been getting a little bit of press recently as things have been changing for Lolita in Florida. The Marine Mammal Stranding Network, the Langley Whale Center, which is a visitor center in Langley on Whidbey Island, and our education and advocacy programs that are available. If you have a group that would like to have a presentation from Orca Network, then please let us know. We'd be happy to arrange that for you. And what we're going to be doing today is focusing on gray whales. There's lots of different whales that use the waters of the Salish Sea, but the gray whales are here right now. These whales are migratory. They spend their summers in the Arctic waters and the Bering and Chukchi Seas, and then they head down the west coast of North America to Baja California for their breeding grounds in the winter months. These whales are larger than killer whales typically and generally slower than killer whales or porpoises. They don't have a dorsal fin. You can see in this picture, this is the part of the whale that would normally have a dorsal fin if it were a humpback whale or an orca. They often travel alone, although they do sometimes travel in small groups when they're here in the Salish Sea. And when they come to the surface to breathe, they have a really low profile in the water, and that can make them hard to spot. They also are very unpredictable. They could surface anywhere at any time. So if we're out on the water in an area where we know that they are around, we need to keep a really careful eye out for them. And even if we don't know that they're around, they might surprise us. So it's always important to be really watching closely for anything that pops up out of the water near our boat or our kayak or our paddleboard or whatever we might be out there on. Now, the Sounders gray whales are a particular group of grays. Over the years, a number of these grays have discovered that there is an abundance of ghost shrimp around the Snohomish River Delta in Puget Sound, and they return year after year to take advantage of it. Now, we can identify the individual whales by looking at the marks on their tails and sometimes the marks on their flanks and dorsal ridges. And this population is known as the Sounders or the North Puget Sound gray whale population. So from late December till May, approximately, the red areas on this map show the common range for these Sounders to be showing up. And that could be as far south as Edmonds on the mainland, Possession Sound, Saratoga Pass, Holmes Harbor, Penn Cove, Port Susan. This year in particular, we're seeing more activity up in Skagit Bay, Bowman Bay, and Deception Pass. Sometimes they'll also hang out for a while on West Beach, which is on Whidbey Island just south of Deception Pass. And we've had some others showing up this year as well. And Elisa's going to be talking a little bit more about that when we get to her part of the program tonight. The gray whales are bottom feeding while they're here. They're the only whale species that does that. And they may be very close to shore as the tide's approaching. They can come into water as shallow as 8 to 10 feet deep to feed on the ghost shrimp that are buried in the sand along the shoreline. And again, they don't have a dorsal fin. Their coloring tends to blend in with the water, and their spout or blow can get knocked down by anything more than a light breeze, which means they're really easy to miss if you're not looking for them specifically. In particular, there is a concentration of these whales around the Everett Marina, because where that circle is on the map there, because the Snohomish River Delta is a really rich feeding area where those ghost shrimp live. And there has been at least one recreational boat strike of a gray whale that's been recorded in this area, and there have been many near misses too. So this is just a really critical spot for them, and if you're operating a vessel in this area, you should really be keeping a close eye out. Also, right now the gray whales are experiencing what's called an unusual mortality event, and Cindy's going to be talking more about what that means toward the end of the program. But the important thing to note as far as the Sounders gray whales are concerned is that any gray whales that come in here may be weaker and slower than usual, because they haven't gotten enough food prior to coming in and looking for it here in the Salish Sea. Now in this image you can see that when a gray whale comes to the surface, if you're just kind of glancing off to the side, you're not really paying attention, that can look like a drift log from a distance. The coloring is really similar to the water. The blow in this case, there's not a lot of wind on the water, but that blow is not really prominent. So they're very easy to miss. If you're lucky, you'll see something that looks a little bit more like this. This is the very classic heart-shaped blow of a gray whale if you're looking at it from the right angle. And this is often the very first indication that you would have that there is a whale in the area. So we're going to take a few minutes to talk about the laws, rules, and guidelines around marine mammals, gray whales in particular, but marine mammals generally, here in the Salish Sea. And I'm going to start with the Coast Guard's Navigation Rules and Regulations Handbook. There are two rules in this handbook that apply to all boaters and are of particular interest in avoiding ship strikes or boat strikes with whales. Rule number 5 is that every vessel shall always be maintaining a proper lookout according to the conditions. And rule number 6 is that every vessel shall at all times proceed at a safe speed according to conditions. So these are, these obviously circumstances vary, but if you are in that area in particular, where we know the Sounders like to hang out, a safe speed is going to be probably a little bit slower maybe than you would normally go. Because again, these whales can pop up anywhere, and you don't want to be surprised by having one in front of you. It's also worth noting that keeping a 360-degree watch, keeping watch all the way around your vessel, that's an important aspect of this, and it may require more than one lookout. So if there's more than one person on your boat, maybe put them to work if you can't see everything, especially in front of you if you're traveling at a speed where your bow is up out of the water, or if you're in the back in the cockpit of a sailboat, having somebody up forward to keep an eye on things for you so that they can let you know if there's a whale up ahead that you might not see otherwise. So if you see a whale from a boat, these are the federal guidelines that NOAA has put forth for doing so. You should remain at least 100 yards away from all whale species. In Washington State, it's at least 200 yards away from killer whales. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Please limit your time spent observing the individuals and groups of whales to 30 minutes or less. And please do not chase, encircle, or leapfrog the whales with any watercraft. Leapfrogging means that you're jumping ahead of their path of travel so that they would come up to your boat or come underneath your boat. So, and you want to travel parallel to them so that they have the freedom to move in whatever direction they want to, with enough space, at least 100 yards, to give them, what they need to be able to go where they want to go. Also, when encountering whales, you want to slow down and operate at a no-wake speed. And never approach whales when calves are present. Gray whales have not yet been seen to bring calves into the Salish Sea, but certainly other whale species do have calves here, so that's an important point to note. Note that for orcas, there are different regulations as far as the distance is concerned. And because the southern resident population of orcas is critically endangered, that requires you to stay 300 to 400 yards away. The other type of killer whale that we have here in the Salish Sea, the bigs or transient orcas, these are mammal eaters and are not considered to be endangered in particular. You could stay 200 yards away from them. However, if you don't know how to tell the difference, or even if you do know how to tell the difference and you don't have a really good set of binoculars or a really good camera lens, always treat killer whales as though they are southern residents and maintain that 300 to 400 yard distance, because that way you know that you're following the appropriate regulation. And then you want to stay 100 yards away from baleen whales like the grays and all other marine mammals. Also, going slow under 7 knots at the first sign of any whale, this is a requirement for the orcas, but it is not necessarily a legal requirement for the baleen whales. However, if you're always traveling 7 knots or less in the presence of whales, you know that you're doing the right thing. So it's a good rule to adhere to. Now you may also notice boats flying these whale warning flags. If you see one of these, that is your signal to start slowing down to 7 knots and really keeping a close eye out to see where are the whales that they're looking at, so that you can maintain proper distance. If you have a whale warning flag already for your vessel, you should fly it if you're within 0.65 miles or 1 kilometer of any whale species, and also while slowing down and sending in a report. More on how to do that in a moment. You can go to whaleflag.org to order your flag and get more information about how this program works. And this is something that's available on both sides of the border, US and Canada. So it's a nice thing to have if you're out on the water a lot and you want to help other people know that there are whales out there, so that they can be careful about that. So when you're out there and you're trying to maintain a safe distance and a legally appropriate distance from the whales, it's important to recognize that accurately estimating your distance over water is an extremely challenging thing to do. And even longtime professional mariners who I know have a really hard time doing it. I've worked on a boat for 11 years and I still have a really hard time judging any sort of, making any sort of accurate estimate. So this is something that if you're out in your vessel, you can practice using radar or GPS with fixed objects, so that you can kind of begin to develop a sense of how far away things are from your boat. This is also something to keep in mind as you are watching from shore, that it's really hard to know exactly how close an animal is to an object or an object is to an animal. And that's particularly important if you are trying to report a violation or even a sighting. So we're going to talk a little bit now about how to make those kinds of reports and what to do if you should encounter an injured or entangled whale. So Orca Network again has our whale sighting network. We post any sightings that are reported, and we make that information available for researchers as well as the general public. Anyone can report a sighting, and we rely on volunteers to help us out by letting us know what they're seeing out there and sending in pictures and videos and other information that we can archive. And our sighting information is available on Facebook in real time or as an email digest. So even if you are not yourself a Facebook user, you can go to Facebook and see our public posts. Or you can sign up for an email digest that occurs will be put out periodically and let you know all the latest news about what's been sighted and what's going on with different whales, and news of interest to whale interested people. What you want to report if you see a whale. So there's a long list of things here, and it's more important that you make a report with any information than that you say, well, if I don't have all this information, I shouldn't make a report. No, please make a report with whatever information you have available. You want to report your time, date, and location. What type of whale you saw, if you know. If you don't know, you could say it's a big whale with a dorsal fin, or it's a big whale without a dorsal fin, or I'm not really sure, but there's something big out there. How many animals are present? Is there a specific direction of travel they seem to be following? Any notable behaviors that you might observe. So for example, is there a lot of splashing? Are they moving really fast? Are they changing direction a lot? What seems to be going on with them? If you're able to include photos and videos, that's great. And then your own contact information for any follow-up questions that might come up, especially if you are reporting any sort of violation or potential injury or entanglement. You can report sightings to the Orca Network Whale Sighting Hotline there, info@orcanetwork.org, or you can post on Facebook. Now, when we have a report that's confirmed on Facebook, we will post the regulations appropriate for boaters for that species of whale, and that will be the graphic that's associated with the post. And you can go to those different posts and update underneath that. So there are days when we have more than one post, because there's more than one whale sighting in Puget Sound. Be sure that you're going to the right one to give that information. Well, what if you see a violation? If you see a boat that's getting too close, or something else, you see a boat strike or something like that, what should you do? You want to share the same information as other sightings. And if at all possible, you want to include vessel registration numbers, or if it's a big ship, the name of the boat, and include photos and videos. So the more information you can give, the better, and the more likely that there will be some sort of meaningful follow-up to the report. If it's a private vessel and you don't have the vessel registration numbers, there's pretty much no chance that the Coast Guard or NOAA or Fish and Wildlife or any of the different enforcement agencies can successfully follow up, because we just don't have the enforcement resources available to get out there and respond to these reports the way that you might expect if you, say, called the police or something like that. Unfortunately, we don't have that resource available to us. If you go to bewhalewise.org, they have an online violations form that you can fill out with all the information that you need to. You also have two phone numbers here on the screen that you can call in the United States. That's NOAA's violations report, and in Canadian waters, it's Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And if you didn't get a chance to write those down just now, again, this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube, and we can post those in chat later. So I'll ask you, given this picture, is this a violation? What do you think? So I could tell you that in this particular case, the clues that we are looking for, number one, the boat does not have any wake. There's no activity happening here around the engines. They've got their fishing gear, although it doesn't seem like they have fishing gear in the water. And it happens that I took this picture, so I know exactly what was going on in this scenario. These folks were not underway. They were on station, and they happened to have some Biggs orcas go by. Ideally, if they had noticed the orcas were 200 or 300 yards away, they might have turned on their engines to very slowly back away, further away from the direction of travel. But by staying on station and not moving, they also are not in violation because they weren't trying to get close to the animals. They weren't interfering with the animals' path, and they weren't deliberately trying to get into the animal's path. What about this picture? Does this look like a violation or not? So this is another situation that I witnessed. This is definitely a violation, but I'm wondering if anyone wants to say in the chat, why is it specifically? There's 2 points here that make it specifically a violation. So the first is speed. You could tell that this boat is moving really quickly by the fact that the bow is up and there's a lot of wake behind it here. And the second is distance. This was a breathtakingly close call that I witnessed in 2018. And in this particular case, as with the time that the one known boat strike, the whale had surfaced twice in the same area directly ahead of the boat. No one is keeping watch in this boat. You can see, if you've got a big enough screen resolution here, you can see that everybody on this boat, 3 people, are all looking in the opposite direction. Nobody, there's not an adequate watch, and the boat's traveling way too fast. And if they had been watching appropriately, they would have seen 2 blows before this surfacing that was almost a collision. What about injured or entangled whales, or maybe a whale that just doesn't seem like it's doing so well? How do we report those? Well, this particular gray whale, this is Cascadian Research Collective identified as number 2362, and this whale was entangled at least once in a crab pot on the Snohomish Delta in 2021. He did manage to get disentangled on his own, which is good. Gray and humpback whales are the most often entangled whales along the Pacific coast, and active fishing gear is frequently the culprit. You may not know a whale is entangled by looking. It may not have anything obvious that you can see from its surfacing, but it may be moving slower, or it may be solitary when it should have been with a group, or it may be just kind of staying in one place, not really doing anything. There's other indications behaviorally that something might not be right. Entanglement can lead to drowning or starvation of the whales, so it's a pretty serious situation for them. And 35 to 50% of large whales along the Pacific coast show entanglement scars, which indicates that they've been entangled and they have managed to disentangle themselves. So this is not a small problem, and as demonstrated by our friend CRC 2362 here, it's a problem that happens here in Puget Sound as well. So if you encounter an entangled or injured whale, you do not want to approach or attempt to disentangle it, because entangled animals are very unpredictable. Of course, it is a human impulse that you want to help in some way, and the best thing that you can do to help both for your safety and the animal's safety is to keep your distance. Do not approach, do not attempt to get involved, despite all those great videos on YouTube that we see of people getting in the water and cutting the lines. No, that's not legal, and it's not safe. Immediately report the entanglement to either of these 2 phone lines. The US line is different than the one for reporting violations. The Canadian line is the same. So either of these lines, report immediately. It is not recommended that you report this on VHF channel 16, because that is the channel, of course, everyone is supposed to monitor. And if people hear that, oh, hey, there's an entangled whale over in this place, maybe they want to come check it out. And we don't want to add any stress to the whale. When you report, you want to give the same information as any other sighting report, the time, the date, the location, as close as you can pinpoint it, and any other details about the situation. Include your contact information, and then take pictures, even if you don't have fancy camera equipment, even if you don't think the photographs are going to be of any use. They might be, because a trained person can really take a look and maybe get some information from the photo that you may not see, obviously. So take those photos and send them in. Your contact information is important so that when the follow-up happens, they can determine the best way for you to get the pictures to them. Now with gray whales, you're looking again for that heart-shaped blow. You might also see the dorsal ridges that we saw in an earlier photo. The bottom photo here is a pectoral fin, that's the front fin. And the fluke, what's happening in this picture is that this whale has come in close to the shore and is rolled over on its side to feed, and that's how they feed. So if you see this happening, this is not an indication that the whale is in distress, it's just normal feeding behavior. Remember that gray whales do not use echolocation and they can pop up anywhere unexpectedly. The minute you have any indication there's a whale in the area, so reduce your speed to under 7 knots, stay 100 yards away from the grays, and maintain a parallel position to the whales. Don't try to get in front of them or behind them in any way. So the take home here is that whales are out there. There's lots of different kinds of whales in Puget Sound, and they can show up at any point, not necessarily based on any previous reports. They can just be there. So make sure that you're keeping that in mind when you're out in your vessel. Some whale species are slower and lower to the surface of the water, which makes them harder to spot if you're not looking for them. They can all appear anywhere, anytime. Reporting the whale sightings helps whales, mariners, and scientists. The more reporting we have, the more information is out there, the more people know and can take the appropriate measures to be sure that they're not going to collide with a whale. And keep good watch while you're out there enjoying yourself on the water. The more you're watching, of course, the more you're going to actually see those whales, as well as making sure that you're operating safely around them. Okay, so now we have a minute for questions before we move into Elisa's presentation.
Stephanie, it looks like there's one in the chat.
Yeah, I just U.S. entanglement number. So that number is based on a large whale entanglement training that I took as part of Pacific Whale Watch Association membership last year. And that's where I got the number. So I'm not sure where they got it, but that's where it's coming from. Okay, and we'll have some more time for Q&A at the end. If we want to go ahead, and Elisa, if you would like to tell us about the sounders.
I'm muted. So hi, I just have a few slides to get us up to date on who has arrived this year, and I don't quite have a handle on who all is still present. Sorry, I didn't get that confirmed, but let's see. This up there. Is that showing?
Looks good, Elisa.
Okay, great, thanks. Oops, all right. So stop that video there. So North Puget Sound Grays are the sounders. So had to put in 2021, 2022 arrivals and newbies because one of our sounders showed up quite early this year. And this is a view in up near Baby Island, and it looks like one of the tankers that was parked up there off Green Bank for a time. And that is a little patch. So let's see, December 7th, 2021, we got a report of a whale just south of Sandy Point on Whidbey Island in Possession Sound. The whale was out there feeding, and at the time I couldn't quite see it. And then I think it was about a week later, someone else sent in photos of who certainly was CRC 53 little patch. And so I got curious and went back and could confirm December 7th and with Allie at Cascadia Research that this was going to be his official arrival date in Puget Sound, and showing up December, you know, almost 3 months early certainly means that he decided against the remainder of the southbound migration and has come in here to feed. He was early, he came in December last year as well. His official date in December 2020 was on the 17th. So he was even a little bit earlier this year, or this season, I should say. And then after him, about a month later, we had another sighting off of Hat Island, and Alice got these wonderful photos, but at the time couldn't ID them. And then it was later in January, one of our longtime volunteers, Marilyn Armbruster, was out with 2 gray whales up off, I believe, Foxbit, Baby Island area, and one of them was 53. And then the other one, it was kind of a mystery. And then eventually we could piece it together. And then Allie Perez, Cascadia Research, could confirm that it was 22. And some of her markings had changed enough that she was a bit trickier this year. And she wasn't here last year, which is one of the years we think that she likely was having a calf. She doesn't show up every year. So she herself then was also, you know, a month and a half to 2 months early. Which is interesting and in keeping with a lot of the other unusual things happening during the unusual mortality event that Cindy will talk more about. Then we get into what's become kind of a more usual time. We used to kind of say around March 1st was the arrival time. But in the last 4 or 5 years, especially during the UME, they've been showing up more in mid-February. So next to show up was CRC 56 on the 10th, and on the same day, 2021 newbie that Stephanie talked about earlier, 2362 was also present that day. So that makes these their official arrival dates, well, or earliest known, yeah. And I won't go through everybody's arrival dates, but I just wanted to show the first several. And then on March 7th, in between that, what was that, last February 10 and March 7, quite a few showed up, and about half of which by that date showed up in the first week of March. And so as of March 7th, there were 12 of the North Puget Sound grays, and that included a couple of newly ID'd gray whales, who for some reason I didn't put on here. I'm mostly I've got the inland Puget Sound grays on here. But this number of arrivals this early was unprecedented. And so here's the arrival dates. And we've got 723 followed by 185, who is a Pacific Coast Feeding Group gray who actually first showed up in the inland waters in 2018 to feed with the other sounders in here. And then on March 5th, 531, 2249 and 2356. A couple of other newbies over the last several years showed up on that day. And then they were followed by Dubnuck 2259 and 21 Shackleton. And there's at the end of my last slide, I'll have the others listed. And this is the last slide. So as of yesterday, and confirmed what we knew, I confirmed it with Ali Perez at Cascadia Research Collective, who is the ID queen, that there are 18 known North Puget Sound grays or newly ID'd gray whales. And then we also have several stragglers, what we call, around the sound. Stephanie touched on that. So as far as up in the Whidbey Basin area, the known feeding areas, I've kind of listed them separately and then given the dates that they were first documented here, to kind of lead into what Cindy's going to talk about with the UME. And you can see those in the early 90s, followed by those in the late 90s, early 2000. And then on the right there, those whales that started showing up and learning to feed alongside the others in 2018 through 2021. And again, 185 was a known whale. So he was just new to the inland waters, but he's a Pacific Coast feeding group gray, another subpopulation that feeds up and down off the West Coast. So he was known to Cascadia, but that was the first year he had been documented feeding in here. And that was all just the year leading up to the UME that was designated in 2019 by NOAA. The other whales that Cascadia has given ID designations are 2440 and 2441. They're hanging out a lot over in Victoria area and Harrow Strait and coming over sometimes into Rosario Strait area. And then more recently, a whale 766 was ID'd and is still over in the Victoria area and been seen with a couple of other whales that Ali is working on IDs for to see if they're previously seen whales or brand new stragglers or newbies. But that whale was only ever once ID'd once before, and that was in 2000, and that was during another UME. And then another newbie, 2019 newbie who hadn't been seen regularly inland, but had come in first in 2019 and was seen in 2020 and now is back again in 2022. So a lot of interesting things going on there. I don't have updates on their conditions. I know that Cascadia, John Kalampakidis and his team have been out at least for one survey earlier, and that the photogrammetry team, John Durbin and Holly Fernbach, have been out once, but I haven't seen any release about that, the findings. So I know they want to get out again as well and hope to get out again this week if weather permits. So we'll have more on the condition of the whales and updates on their body condition after feeding. So Stephanie did touch on that other whales do show up in other parts of the sound. So we have quite a few stragglers in different parts of the Salish Sea, some that I talked about over out Victoria at Harrow Strait area. And there's also some in the inland waters of Puget Sound in areas where there are not, they aren't known feeding areas. So oftentimes they end up in the South Sound and doesn't generally end well for them because as far as we know, there's not food for them to find down there. So I think that's it. And So we do post these sightings and updates, and when we get more information from Cascadia and SR3 SEA team, we'll share that. But in general, we don't share the locations of sick or injured whales or emaciated whales. We will if we think or know that they're healthy. But so I think that that's kind of a good summary of what's going on. And like I said, of all of these whales, I think I can recall at least sightings in the last week of any of the whales listed here. So I just don't know if today they're all still inland. So, all right, that's me. Stop sharing.
So before we move on to the last section of the evening, does anybody have any questions for Elisa? If so, feel free to write them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll just wait for a moment here and see if anybody has any questions. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with the last section. And if you do have questions that come up, again, feel free to write those either in the Q&A or the chat. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit more about this unusual mortality event, or UME, and the status of gray whales, and really kind of go into just a little bit more detail for a few minutes about why we're focusing on them for this evening. So I'll go ahead and share my screen and assume that somebody will let me know if it's not showing up correctly. So just going to take a few minutes to talk about their status and what's going on most recently with this unusual mortality event that's happening with gray whales that you heard referenced earlier. So the gray whales, this particular population of gray whales is known as the Eastern Pacific gray whale, and their status is that they were very heavily hunted in the past. And once hunting became illegal, they recovered very quickly, so much so that they were actually removed from the Endangered Species Act in 1994. So they are no longer listed as endangered. But shortly after they were removed from that list, they experienced an unusual mortality event. This is an official designation by NOAA that basically means there's a higher than average number of mortality occurring in the population. So this took place over 2 years, in 1999 and 2000. Approximately 25% of the population was thought to have been lost during that time. And they're not really sure exactly what caused it. We know that most of the animals that stranded were starving, emaciated, but they were never really able to determine exactly what was causing that. Was it specifically a food issue? Was there a disease process going through the population? That was an answer that they never were able to find. The population did recover after that mortality event, again, very quickly. Gray whales are very adaptive, and they're able to get through these things pretty well. So they did recover. The current population is thought to be around 20,000. Historically, we don't really know what that number was pre-whaling, but thought to be maybe around 26 or 27,000. That's what the number was before the unusual mortality event. So they did recover to almost that number, but now there's a new UME that was declared in 2019, which again has probably taken approximately 25% of the population. So they're now down to about 20,000 individuals. There were actually signs that this UME was coming before 2019. So this is information from Laguna San Ignacio. As Stephanie mentioned, I do spend winters down there. This was my 20th year working down there at a gray whale camp. So I do have access to some great researchers down there who have been collecting a lot of data over the years. And they actually started to notice some changes in overall body condition in these whales in 2018. So these are some drone photos that were taken from the lagoon. This is one lagoon out of 3 that the gray whales go to, but you can kind of take this information and extrapolate it to the other areas as well. So 2017, this picture on the left just kind of shows an average normal body condition of a gray whale. In 2018, they started to notice that a lot of the whales were becoming more thin. And then in 2019, they were seeing more emaciated whales. And that was the year that this UME was declared. So here's some numbers on the current unusual mortality event, broken down by year. And these are the numbers on the bottom. These are the numbers of strandings or whales that have died and washed ashore. So a total so far since the UME was declared of 531. And comparing that to the previous UME of 99 and 2000 of 651. So not quite as high as that first UME, but definitely on track and continuing. This UME is not over yet. And what's important to note is that these numbers are not the total mortality of the gray whales. It's estimated that that represents maybe 10% of the total mortality. So the whales that are coming ashore that we're actually seeing are a very small percentage of the ones that are actually dying. So another thing that has been noticed in Laguna San Ignacio is a lot of emaciated whales. In a typical average year down there, they might see less than 10% of the gray whales are looking skinny. During this UME, just since 2018, when they first started documenting this, the population of skinny whales has been up to about 30%. So a lot more skinny, emaciated whales showing up down there. Keeping in mind that they've just come off their feeding season, so they should be showing up pretty fat and healthy, and they're basically living on that blubber through the winter when they're not eating down there. So when you've got whales down there looking emaciated, that is a really, really bad sign. The other thing that they have noticed is very low mom and calf counts at the lagoon. So again, on a good year, so 2011 to 2017 were good years, and you would see anywhere from 50 to 130 pairs of mom calves in the lagoon at any one time. Since the UME, it's been less than 20. So certainly what is going on with the population is affecting reproduction. What's interesting is that none of the mothers or calves are the emaciated whales. So the moms and calves all look to be in really good body condition, which is good news. So it's mostly the single whales that are really, really skinny. So what's causing this UME is a big question. There is a big international team of scientists working on this. They meet once a month and discuss all of the information that they have. They're trying to do necropsies on as many whales as they possibly can, collect all that data and see if they can figure out what's going on. And so to date, we still don't know exactly what's causing it, whether it has to do with the food or if there's some kind of disease going through the population. They have started to test for viruses recently. They've been sending samples off to labs to check for some of these viruses. So we may have some answers on that fairly soon. But there is a lot of belief that it could be climate change caused and that could be affecting their food up in the Arctic. This was an article that came out recently in CNN, basically talking about how the warming Arctic could be playing a big role in this. And things are changing up in the Arctic, we know that. And have we passed a certain threshold where maybe things have changed forever for the predators and the prey up there? So that's something that we certainly need to be looking at. There is a new paper that just came out just a few days ago, actually, basically looking at that very thing. Has the prey changed up in the Arctic due to a warming climate? And basically what they found is that in the Bering Sea, it certainly seems that the amphipods that these gray whales traditionally have fed on are not there anymore. They've really declined. Whereas in the Chukchi Sea, there's still quite a bit of amphipod biomass there. So there's still quite a bit of food for them. And in some areas, they're actually finding that the gray whales are moving kind of further away from where they traditionally fed. And perhaps they are feeding on krill instead of the bottom amphipods that they're used to. They don't have the evidence on that yet, but it's something that they're speculating is happening. So this is some pretty interesting research that's going on right now that hopefully will shed some more light on what's going on with these gray whales and this UME. And if anybody is interested in learning more, The main author of this paper, Dr. Sue Moore, is going to be presenting at our Welcome the Whales presentation on April 23rd at 3:30 in Langley. So she's going to be talking about gray whales as sentinels of climate change. And that will be an in-person event, but we will also be doing a hybrid version. So you will be able to catch it over Zoom if you are interested. And then just briefly, I just want to talk about the sounders again and how they found this area. Elisa had talked about the different kind of clumps of years when they started coming in, and Cascadia Research kind of noticed a pattern there, whereas the first group of individuals started coming in 1990 and 91. That was not a UME declared group of years, but it was a time of low food abundance. So it's thought that these whales kind of wandered in when they weren't finding food in their regular areas and found the ghost shrimp here and then just kept coming back year after year. The second wave of individuals showed up in 1999 and 2000. That was the other UME that we had referred to. And then now this third wave has started to show up during this UME. And this is not a complete chart. We need to get an updated one from Cascadia Research. This one is through 2020. So there are actually even more individuals to add to this now. But basically, they're finding this area during these times of low food abundance. And what researchers have found is that the ghost shrimp in this area is incredibly important to them. So this is some drone footage that was taken of these gray whales. This is number 21, Shackleton. And you can see in the picture on the left of March of 2020, he's looking rather thin. That was when he first showed up. A month later, he had really fattened up. So these ghost shrimp are incredibly important to these gray whales. And that's one of the reasons we need to be extra careful about protecting them, because they're coming in here to feed on this and it's saving their lives. We also, as Elisa mentioned, we have stragglers who are coming in looking for food, and they may or may not find the ghost shrimp. And during this UME in particular, they're not getting enough food, they're hungry, they may not be paying as much attention to what's going on around them. They're weak, they're debilitated, so they aren't paying as much attention. And so that's kind of why we're reaching out to the public to ask all of the boaters out there to really pay attention and make sure that you're noticing where these gray whales are, so that we're not putting them in harm's way. All right, I think that's it for me. So I will stop sharing my screen and we can see if there are any final questions from anybody. So while if people are thinking of questions to write down, we'll just mention we are doing an event called Welcome the Whales on April 23rd and 24th. We mentioned earlier the presentation by Dr. Sue Moore, which will be part of that. We're also doing a parade in Langley on the 23rd to welcome the Sounders. We have all that information up on our Facebook page and website. We're going to be doing a boat trip on Sunday, the 24th, to go out and see the Sounders. So if anybody's interested in any of those events, you can find that info on our Facebook page and website. Hope you'll join us. Elisa, there's a question for you in the Q&A. Did you see that one?
I did see that, and I know I meant to check and kind of make sure I could know exactly who was all still here and when might be their last sighting, but I've been wondering that myself, and also 723. I don't know that I've heard much about those two, so could just be they're feeding in places that people aren't seeing them, or maybe they've taken off. You know, I mean, Little Patch was so early, so I don't have a correct answer for you. Good question though. I did want to mention, I put it in the chat, but kind of a one-stop shop for all regulations and guidelines is bewhalewise.org. So you can find everything there about boating vessel regulations and also entanglement, things like that as well. It's another resource, great resource.
All right, well, if no one has any other questions, do we have any closing comments from any of us?
I just, as whale sighting network coordinator, I want to thank everyone, whoever sends in their sightings and helps us keep track of the whales. And I know researchers and educators and other people around the sound appreciate it as well. So we can make that public in various ways to all of them and collaborate with them. So thank you for your being part of the network and coming tonight.
And I want to thank everybody for being here tonight as well. And again, if you have a group that you're involved with that you would like to have an educational program from Orca Network, please be in touch and let us know. This one is, well, the one that I was doing was focused on boaters, but we do programs for school groups as well and community groups of all kinds. So we're happy to come out and or set up a Zoom meeting, however it works for your group to share this information with you. Oh, there's great question, Marilyn, about any moratoriums on commercial shrimp fishing or thoughts about it. Hmm.
Oh, I guess I can take that one.
Thank you, Cindy.
Good question, Marilyn. So that's been discussed a lot about the ghost shrimp, which are actually harvested for bait. And there have been a lot of discussions. The Orca Network every year has discussions with DNR, who are the ones who are kind of monitoring that and giving the permits for the harvest. Right now, there is not a moratorium. There is kind of a timeline of when they're allowed to harvest the ghost shrimp, which is based on when we used to see the sounders in this area. But since that number has increased, the number of sounders as well as the amount of time that they're staying here, they're certainly eating a lot more ghost shrimp than they used to. And the numbers that they're kind of basing this on are from 2016, before this unusual mortality event began. So we're definitely still trying to have conversations about that, about potentially trying to maybe have the harvest stop when the first whale shows up and resume after the last whale leaves, rather than making it, for a couple of months when the sounders used to be here, knowing that that's really changing right now and that food source is so, so important for them. So we're working on it, but great question. Thank you, Marilyn. All right, any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. And we hope you get a chance to see the sounders from a safe distance.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.